Welcome to a very special episode of Bee Shifter. John Vance, your host here. I am on the road, actually, sitting in downtown Las Vegas. We're here doing a Train the Trainer with the Las Vegas Fire Department, and I wanted to get part one of a very special Bee Shifter route. We were in New York City, or at least I was last week, with Chief Vinny Dunn. This episode was recorded on June 3rd of 2022 in Manhattan, and we wanted to get together with Vinny and just get some of his stories on audio for all of us to enjoy. He does have a new book out. That new book is called The War Years, his memoirs as a fire chief. It's available now. I've got all that information for you in the show notes. One of the unfortunate things about this episode is Nick was supposed to be with me, but American Airlines canceled his flight. So Nick is zooming in. I'm actually in Manhattan sitting down with Vinny Dunn. This is going to be a two-part episode. So this is part one, and then in the next week or so, we will put out part two. So please enjoy this Bee Shifter with Fire Chief Vincent Dunn. This is a very special Bee Shifter. We are in New York City. Nick and myself were supposed to meet here last night, but Nick's flight was canceled, and he is stuck in Phoenix. And but we are here with Chief Vinny Dunn, retired FDNY, and we're going to talk to him a little bit today about his memoirs that he just put together, about the war years, and then wherever else we go here on Bee Shifter. So, Vinny, thanks for being here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. You know, I'm ready for questions.
It's good to see you again. You know, we had you at University of Notre Dame. We started talking about that, and there was a little miscommunication one day.
I overslept.
Yeah, and we were afraid you died. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to make national news. Vinny Dunn dies at a conference, and it's our conference.
I overslept.
Yeah, so I covered for you for I just got up and started BSing. I didn't know what I was doing. So until you came in, then you came in and did a great class. So we appreciate that.
Okay.
And of course, Nick's here live via Zoom from Phoenix, Arizona. So good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
Hi, Nick.
John Vance. Chief Dunn.
And Rachel, can I get just a little more volume in my headphones? How's your headphones?
I'm pretty good. I mean, I could hear everybody's low. I guess I could use a little more.
There we go. That's great.
Okay, that's better. Okay, good.
I'm hard of hearing from wearing headphones, ironically enough.
Okay.
So we want to talk about the memoirs. And first of all, where's this available at if somebody wants your book?
VincentDunn.com.
Okay.
All of my books, fire engineering books, the Fire Pro books, and this book, which I actually published myself. Fire Pro ran out of money. They didn't have money in the budget because of COVID. Fire Pro is the Fire Foundation. They depend on an annual dinner for donations. The last 2 years, there were no donations. So when I spoke to Joe Malvasio, the Fire Foundation boss, I said, I got a book I want to write. He said, Vin, we have no budget. So, it cost me $15,000 to write this memoir. So I wouldn't advise it. But my ego is so big that I had to get this. And my daughter kept bothering me. Hey, Dad, you got to leave something. So that was the impetus.
These are great stories. And, the FDNY is revered, and you're revered. You're foremost building expert, especially when it comes to collapses. I took a building construction for the fire service class back in the 90s, and the instructor would start every class by popping a VHS tape of you talking. And at the time, I thought you were a building engineer, that became a deputy chief.
No.
So, but you throughout your career studied buildings and particularly collapses because of some incidents that happened.
Yeah, and I mean, that was where I was, interested in. I had a few fires where buildings collapsed. And then, as I was saying the other day, I started going around asking guys in firehouses. I said, have you ever had a collapse? This is now back in the 78 when I decided to write this book. And the guy, oh, yeah, Chief, we had one there. The wall blew out on us in an alleyway. Oh, yeah, this floor fell down. I couldn't believe everybody had a story about building collapse, and I said, how could the fire service for 100 years have not documented this? So I knew I had a tremendous subject. And of course, now I find out that, I had been involved in that 23rd Street collapse where 12 firefighters died. And I really didn't blink. I just went on with my career. And then 12 years later, then I started thinking about that collapse. As I'm now a deputy, the same rank as Tom Riley was, who died in the collapse. And I'm saying, now I'm in charge of all these guys in the Bronx. And the Bronx at the time had vacant buildings collapsing. So that was on my mind. And like now I say, that came out that, we didn't have post-traumatic stress debriefing back in the 60s. So 12 years later, I start to write about building collapse, and I can't stop writing about building collapse. So John Page, the editor of Firehouse, said, Vin, you got to stop writing about collapse. I said, John, I cannot. I said, if you don't want me to write, I'm not going to write. So my first article for WNYF in 1978 was Parapet Wall Collapse. My first article for John Page and Dennis Smith in his Firehouse magazine was predicting building collapse, which I always tell you can't do. And that was it. That was my subject. And one day I tell my wife, I said, Pat, I said, I feel like I'm vomiting these words out. I don't know what's going on. I just keep vomiting words about building collapse. So that was how I best described it. And now, of course, it was in my stress debriefing 12 years later, or somebody said, it's called exorcising your demons. And I didn't know I had any demons. So I wrote that book, I guess. And it's funny, in that book, I did not talk about the 23rd Street collapse. I never wrote about that. Recently I have, I've talked about it more than I wrote about it because I guess it was too close to me. And so I didn't really write that much about it, but I wrote about wall collapse, floor collapse, stairway collapse, roof collapse, any other kind of collapse you could imagine, but not specifically about that fire,
There was a deputy chief that was killed in the line of duty at that fire from the collapse. Was that unusual for a deputy chief to be interior during a firefight?
I don't mean to laugh, but we were discussing this at the 50th anniversary. Well, we didn't locate the fire because the fire was in a cellar that had broken through to the cellar of a store on another street. And there were two big buildings, and this fire was in the middle of these buildings, and we couldn't locate this fire. We had a second alarm in, and nobody knew where this fire was between these two buildings. But anyway, the deputy at the fire was Thomas Riley, 3rd Division Deputy Chief, which I became later. But I was a lieutenant. And so on the 50th anniversary of the tragedy of the 23rd Street collapse, we have a big ceremony. Everybody goes down to 23rd Street. We're all there, honoring the lost firefighters. And Tom Riley's son comes to this reunion. Now, this fellow looks like a CEO executive, or he looks like a military man, And he just keeps coming up to me and he's saying to me, Chief, how come my father was in there with the nozzle man? Don't you guys have procedures of command positions in the military? The general is not up there with the forward infantry. He keeps saying, why was my father in there with the nozzle guy in the engine company? So I said, we didn't have command positions at that time, as your dad, Alan Brunacini, gave us in the 70s and 80s. In 1966, we didn't specify where. We didn't have the language for operations chief, logistics chief, command chief. We got that with Bruno in the 70s and 80s. But 66, there was no criteria. The deputies generally stay outside. Rarely does the deputy go in there. But I related a story. Now I'm in the Bronx. It's got to be 79. And I have this second alarm fire and it's a vacant 2-story commercial building. And I have a second in, and we can't find this fire. Now, I'm, outside, I'm saying battalion 18, and I didn't know this battalion chief. It was a new covering guy. If you know a battalion chief, you just rarely go in. But now I'm saying, I got to go in and see where this fire is. I got a second alarm in. So I go in the back to look for this fire. So I'm going in the back of this vacant building. I run up the stairs, 3 stairs, and I'm running up these stairs to look and take a peek. And the guy said, Chief, watch out. And what are they yelling about? And then all of a sudden I start to float in the air. No, I'm going down. There's no flooring on the top of these stairs. So my left hand goes into a nail. There's a big nail. Goes through my left hand. My right leg gets pulled up behind me, thank God. And my right hand, I grab onto the other end of this opening before I fall in the basement. So I limp out, embarrassed in front of all those firefighters who were saying, Chief. I go out to the front, and this fella is out there, Joe Sarzone. And I said, Joe, I said to my driver, transmit the third alarm. I said, Joe, I'm going down. And I fall in the water, the runoff water from the fire. And then I remember I wake up in the ambulance, and this redheaded guy with a beard is holding my hand. He said, Chief, you're going to be okay. This was like a death experience. I mean, this was pretty strange. So I wake up in the ambulance, and Jesus. So my point was, at 12 noon, I check out of that hospital with a bandaged left hand, a bandaged knee, a tetanus shot in my butt, and a cane. So and then I realized, sometimes the deputy does run in to look for the location. I did what Tom Riley did. So maybe we shouldn't. Maybe there's a lesson there. Yeah. So he died. I got away easy. We may not always be out there, but, that's where the deputy's position is. You got an operations chief. He goes inside. He tells you. And only chiefs had radios. There was better communications today. Officers didn't have radios then. And so things have improved. We got our act together. The chiefs do. So it was less likely to happen. Today.
You had the same driver who was your engineer on the engine, and he followed you through most of your career, right? He retired before you, but how common is that for the engineer to come over with the chief? Actually,
I think it's common. I think, once you make that connection in a cab, and that was my defining assignment, the 58 engine in the fire factory. I mean, we just, responded. So I remember when I'm new up there, I'm new captain. So I'm driving with this guy. His nickname was Popeye. He looked like Popeye. He used to smoke a pipe, and say, who is this guy? So everybody respected him highly. So the captain, I got him as a driver. So we would be going out to fires. And then I remember, I used to get out of the cab and direct it back into quarters, and he would smile, because this guy backed that fire truck back up so many years. So I finally, near the end, I didn't have to get out and check because I knew Walter was going to back in the rig. Well, Walter Fornes was his name. So this guy was a carefree guy, Popeye, smoked a pipe, laughed a lot, didn't. As soon as he went back up to the bunk when he was asleep, guys would say that when his second shoe hits the floor, he's snoring. But he was always down there responding. So I'm new captain, and so he takes a day off. He said, Chief, I got so-and-so coming in to drive me. So, all right, so we get a couple of runs, and this new driver for one day now is saying, Cap, where are we going? Cap, what's the name of it? What's the box, Cap? Cap, can you see the hydrant down there, Cap? Cap, what's the address of the look? Wait a minute, Jesus, Walter never asked me any of this stuff. So then I realized how great this driver was when he took a day off. When the average guys, and I realized this was a very hectic assignment. The most comforting, calming 2 minutes of my tour was when I was in the cab with Walter Fornes. I didn't have to think about anything. I could just let my mind wander because I was in his care, and nothing could happen to me while I was in that cab. So he was he was a beautiful, beautiful person. But again, very unassuming. You never asked him. So then we were in 58, the fire factory together. And then I got promoted battalion chief. So, I said, Walter, would you? He said, I'd give it a try. And I never thought this guy is going to work out in that battalion. He's got to do administration work, and he's got to call up everybody for working overtime. But this guy, we get into the, so I remember the first fire we went to was back in 58 engine, which we knew everybody, so it was very nice, went out quickly. But we're driving back to quarters. I said, did you give an all hand? Did you give under control? He said, no, I thought you gave under control. So when we get back to the quarters, we had to call the dispatcher. Oh, by the way, it's under control. The fire, they knew it. They could tell. But anyway, so Walter would handle this administration load. And I'm telling you, he was on that phone and doing that paperwork all day long. And I almost felt guilty, I did some command decisions, but so he did. And then one day, how we started out, he says, Chief, we have 2 desks back to back. And, and I forget there was a little problem. Some officer called up, didn't like the way he was handling something. So I didn't say anything, but Walter says to me, hey, Chief, just let's get straight. That's your side of the desk. This is my side of the desk. What you say over there stays on your side. What I do over here stays on my side. Now, it's the way we work. And then when I made deputy chief. Now, this guy lived in Canarsie. I used to call it an alleyway. It was a very poor part of Canarsie. And that's, very far end of Brooklyn. And he traveled up to Harlem for 20 years in 58 engine. And then 3 more when I was a battalion chief. So now we go to the Bronx. I'm up in the north, up in the Bronx, by Fordham Road. Every day he takes the train from Canarsie. Takes the train. He doesn't drive. He's now doing officers' assignment. He's got to call officers, say, we need somebody to fill in when there's a sick leave in 58 engine or 24, 33 truck. So he would talk to the wives. He'd call them up. And they got to know him very well. And he had a very quaint way of speaking. So I would listen to him sometimes on the phone. And he's saying he would be, as the women knew him well, and he would call up. He said, "Oh, Mrs. O'Grady," he says, "I'd like to rent your husband's body tonight." And then if he couldn't, he would say to Mrs. O'Grady, "Okay, he can stay home and make babies," he said, So, and then like we had, if a guy was not showing up, he'd hang up the phone. He said to me, he's cuter than pink toilet paper, And then when he was in trouble at home, I said, well, how's things going at home? He said, well, I'm getting his hot tongue and cold shoulder. He's from my wife, Penny. But anyway, so the wives loved this guy. And I got scared. I said, today, we would be in trouble. Okay. With the way he talked to these women, we would be in trouble. But anyway, like the Manhattan Borough Command woman would call him in the morning in bed, and God knows what was going on in that conversation. All I would hear them laughing. And even when we go to the Borough Command, the woman in the borough wouldn't say hello to me. Hey, Walter, how you doing? So he was his favorite. But anyway, so one day, now we're down in the 3rd Division. So we're not down in Midtown Manhattan, down here. So I remember this captain comes in. And beautiful looking wife comes in. So they come in and Walter's off and I'm down in the apparatus floor. So he says, Chief, he says, here's my wife. I'd like to introduce you. She says to me, oh, Chief, nice meeting you. She says, is Walter Forness working today? I says, no, he's off. Anything I can do to help you? She says, no, I just wanted to meet him. So he was the star. And anyway.
Did you talk to wives when you were doing staffing at Phoenix? Or did you only talk to the firefighters, Nick?
No, it was all only firefighters.
Yeah.
That was mostly it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anyway.
We didn't have a Walter where I worked.
Yeah.
Not on my shift, at least.
Yeah. Well, you were probably the Walter, Nick. You were the Walter.
In some ways, but not in others.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, Vinny, I first became aware of you in probably the early 80s. And I had just become an officer. And part of that gig is I ended up teaching at the local community college, like intro to fire suppression. So, and this is back in the 80s. And it was different looking for content to teach in your class. So the place I would find that typically were in the classified ads of Firehouse magazine. And it was almost like pornographers were selling raw fire footage where they would just show up to fires in New York City and just videotape. And then the people videotaping would just kind of comment of what was going on. So then that quickly got me to the videos you made on the collapse of burning buildings. So the deal where a truss roof system is just a lumber yard above your head.
Yeah.
So this had because you were an East Coast guy, it was almost like you were from another country. So the students would listen, and sometimes you'd have to translate for them. They're like, what did he just say? Well, that's Vinny Dunn. This is who he is and what he does. But it was crazy because we're getting ready to do this podcast, and Garrido sent us a copy of your memoir. So we start reading this, and I thought, oh, my God, Vinny Dunn worked in the original Fire Factory. That was you.
Yes.
Oh, it was crazy. So as you're reading these stories, I'm starting to try to connect them to my own career. So when you started, you go to work, your first shift you go in, how much did it cost to eat during the shift?
Well, in the, now when I went in 57, so, and this firehouse had a lot of problems. It was an old historic engine company since 1893. And 2 years before, they moved in a squad company, which was put together of young guys, old guys, some guys dumped out of companies, and they didn't pick up hose. They didn't do watches. And so there was a lot of conflict there. So most of the time, nobody cooked. It was running, and there was a drinking firehouse. This is before 202. Today New York City is there's no drinking. You can get fired. They have inspectors coming around unannounced. You get triggered with drugs or alcohol, you're fired. No, it's zero tolerance. But anyway, back then it wasn't. So the meals weren't they would have liquid lunches many times. And most guys brought of course, I was a kid. I was single. My mother would make me a lunch. So I would come to this firehouse and, you put a little sandwich in the refrigerator. Sometimes it wasn't there, but most of the time it was there. But when they did decide to cook, when some brave soul wanted to cook for the squad and the engine, he said, hey, kid, are you in? So, I thought, oh, yeah, I'm in. I forget my mother's sandwich. You had to join. You had to be in. So, and are you in or out? That's the way they'd ask you. Oh, no, I'm in. But there wasn't too many meals cooked back then. And nobody wanted to step up. It wasn't a close firehouse, as many houses are. Like when I went to the Fire Factory now, we had John Sonino, who stepped up all the time. He was always cooking. But back in this firehouse, we didn't. So we would get in and get out. When there was a lunch cooked, everybody would get in. And it was a very good event.
Excellent. So it wasn't until later on that you guys had more of a, I don't know, I guess you'd call it a traditional kind of family-style meal together.
Well, firehouses are, as you know, are like families. Some families are dysfunctional. Some families are close. When I was the division chief, you could see it. When you went around, we had to visit every firehouse in Midtown. Some firehouses would stand there in fear or anger and not say a word. And you'd hold a roll call, and that was it. Everybody was very formal. And you'd sign the book and leave. Other firehouses, Chief, come on, you want to come back, have lunch, stay with lunch? Other firehouses were funny. They'd crack jokes when you're doing a roll call. So you said, these firehouses have personalities. But so that was it. I mean, my first firehouse was a dysfunctional firehouse. The fire factory was together, and I was a big together guy. So I promoted John Sonino because he would step up and cook every night, which there were 3 companies in the fire factory. So that was even more difficult.
Your first station was dysfunctional and wouldn't eat together. And then as you move through your career, you get to the fire factory. And that was a busier station that ran more fires. But it sounds like it tended to be more united and family-like.
It was a tough firehouse. It was definitely more united. We were united by firefighting. I mean, we were united by the workload. We were united by, at the time, you couldn't leave the firehouse. I mean, we were not welcomed in the community. The riots were taking place around that time. Like when I was in my first firehouse, the guys would go up to the corner, drink on 137th Street in the bar with the local people. There would be a run sometimes. At 137th Street, they hit the horn. 2 guys would run out of the Yucatan bar on the corner of 137th and 7th Avenue, jump on a rig. So we hung out in the community in 57s. But then 68 in the fire factory, was no, you got into work and you stayed into work. Nobody was socializing.
When I was at BC, during that time, it seems like the stations where I had the most personnel problems were the slowest ones that had the least amount of activity. And so they had a lot more time to be dysfunctional with one another. Whereas the busier stations, you had no personnel problems, really. Everybody got along a lot better, it seemed, in those spots. And part of it, I think, is because they were doing their jobs more often. And is that the mainstay of your activity is kind of the work we do. It seemed to unite them more and eliminate a lot of the problems you would get when you weren't working.
Sure. I mean, when you had no work, guys would get antsy and little bickerings would start. And if you got the fire, then everybody was happy. Everybody was working together. Guys who you may have been angry with, at the fire scene could have done something good for you. And then that solved everything. So by all means, fire duty caused a cohesive fire company. And then and again, but it depends on the top whip. We used to call a guy who was the senior firefighter. He could create a wonderful firehouse. It was personalities more. But what you say is true. Regardless of whether it was a tight firehouse or a dysfunctional firehouse, fire duty made it tighter or more functional. Fire duty was good for the group dynamics.
Yeah, we always say at my place that if we do have a morale problem, all we need is a fire to fix it. That's right. And then everyone starts being happy again because you get to self-actualize and do what we're trained to do.
That's right.
Then in your memoir, is you go from one piece to the next, and your breaks between chapters through most of the book is poetry. That's the first time I've ever read any kind of fire service book where there was poetry in it. It's almost like it's public safety literature. Who is the poet?
Well, I'll tell you about the poet. Her name is Susan Mosier. You can see her on Facebook. She's on Facebook, but she was the editor of WNYF, our fire department magazine with New York Firefighters. It stands for and she was a volunteer firefighter. So I got to know her when I would write for our magazine. When I would write for WNYF, she was the editor. So very good editor. She gave me a lot of advice. She left WNYF, must have been in the 80s. I never heard from her again. So I'm posting on Facebook, and I see her write this big poem about fire. It's a big, page-long poem. So I said, for some reason, I emailed her. I said, Susan, how you doing? Vince Dunn here. I said, I would like you to write a poem for my Facebook page. I have a Facebook page, Vincent Dunn's Fire Battle Space. So she said, sure. I said, short ones. Not that long. I don't want anything that long. Short, less is more. So then what happened was Matty Daly is an old friend of mine, a photographer from the Bronx, up in 48 Engine. Matty Daly he's the official bagpipe band photographer. I've known Matty since I was a deputy up there in the 70s. So Matty is dropping these pictures, and I said to him one day, what is your wife making you clean out your closet? Why are you putting all these old fire pictures online? So he laughed, and he just kept putting them on. So when I would see these pictures that Matty Daly would post, I grabbed a couple, and I had a folder called Best Life or Death Pictures. And I was picking, he had many fire pictures, but I pick a life or death photograph, where somebody's giving a kid oxygen or somebody's pulling a baby out of a window. So I had this folder. So now I got maybe 40, 50 pictures. So I said to Susan, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I love your poetry. The reason her poetry works is she was a firefighter, so she edited firefighting articles. Not many people could do this, write this poetry. So she knows the fire service world, and she's a very sensitive woman. This woman, I don't know any women like her. She's got this way about her. She's very sensitive. So anyway, So I start to send her these photographs of Matty Daly. Susan, could you write pictures? So now I gave her an assignment. I sent her 15 or 20 photographs. And I said, I want you to write short poems about these dramatic photographs. And that was the key. And she wrote magic. I mean, she wrote words that no firefighter could say. That's the reason those poems are so great. I could not say what she says. I know it's true. And, of course, Matty Daly's photographs taken in the 70s and 80s and her poetry, it's stunning. I mean, so every book I ever write from now on will have poetry in it and have her poetry in it. So it was a pretty good idea.
One of the things I wanted to talk about is kind of just the way you guys would do a fire attack as you were back in the day. And you said it with the pictures. There's a lot of life and death stuff. But everything I have seen and read about FDNY it was like at the scene of your fires, your number one goal, it seemed to me, was to get water on the fire as quick as you could. Is that kind of the way you guys would manage your attacks? You're the first engine. You get to the scene of an obvious working fire. What are you going to do as the officer of the truck?
Let me tell you one thing. It's not getting the water on that fire. The number one thing you got to do is locate the fire. In these buildings, as you see, John, here, it's worse than the tenements. You have to locate exactly where that fire is before you tell them where to stretch. And that doesn't get enough credit, locating a fire. So you become a maniac. I was in the fire factory as the first due engine. I located the fire. I was in great shape. I would first locate the fire. Okay, now stretch that line. I am up on the third floor. So your apartment. But, so, there was a question, I remember there was a question on one of the promotion exams, and I always mention it. They said, you arrive at a large fire, and what's the first thing you do? I said, do you save lives? You stretch the hose line? Do you start venting? Or do you locate the fire? And the answer was locate the fire. So, and so that was it. So we locate the fire, then we stretch the line. That's the name of the game. And we become, you got to stretch that line, and that is, it makes everything work fine if you do. It stops the smoke, it stops the fire, and stops the toxic gases which kill people. So you're really doing tremendous life-saving work by putting that fire out.
So you get there first to locate the fire. Now, would you guys if you knew the building it was in, so you get to the building and you got smoke coming off of it, do you lay a supply line with the first engine, or do you have it laid to you?
We got a great water system. So we have hydrants all over the place. We have 2 hydrants, sometimes 3 hydrants on the street. So we operate with these hydrants. So what we do is, for example, if there's no hydrant in front of the building, we had these donuts of 4 or 5 lengths of 1 3/4 hose. We'd pull the donut off, and then the driver would take off to the hydrant and lay the hose out it was only 100 feet, sometimes, not far to a hydrant. Then he had a hydrant connection. He would take care of all that. And then we would have that donut, and stretch it up to the 4th, the 5th, the 6th floor, whatever it was. And that's how we did it. So, and it was routine. So we were blessed with a great water supply and a great hydrant system.
So when you got there, first engine, you pull your attack line off the truck where you think the fire is. Do you take the line in with you, or do you go in and find the fire, then get the line?
Well, what I would do is we pull in the street. We'd go through. Now there's a row of tenements there. So I would get off. I'm the captain. I would get off. We got an address. I'd run up the stairs, and the guys wouldn't stretch. We didn't want them to stretch the hose unnecessarily because we got another run. We would be stuck in the street. So they would wait for me to go up to find the 5th floor. Hey, we got to find the top floor. Come on, let's go. Then the hose would come up, and they were quick doing that. But they would let me locate it first. Then, I had a radio as a captain, and the chauffeur had a radio. That's all. So he guys, pull the hose up. And, of course, my buddy Walter, he would always get the hydrant. He always got water first. He was an ace at that.
So your standard operation, the crew's getting the line off the truck in the street, and then the officer goes up into the building and tries to find the seat of the fire. Radio's down. And then the crew starts humping hose up to get to the officer.
And that's a tenement fire. Now, with the residential fire, with a private dwelling fire, I think they did the same out in Queens. They would get a house fire. They could see if there's smoke, or if there was smoke coming from that house fire. They were gonna get right in front of it, drop off their 1 3/4 roll of hose, and then that chauffeur was responsible to get water source. And if he had a problem, then the second due would help him. But the function of the first due engine is to get water on that fire. The chief comes in and there's no water on that fire. It's the first due's problem. Who's the first due engine? Well, how come there was no hose line stretch? And there was always a hose line stretch. Sometimes not to the right place, but there was always a hose line stretched.
And so your standard attack line then was 1 3/4 attack line.
Well, it's funny. I was doing some research because John sent me a little note. When I came in the job, we had 1.5 inches. We had 1.5 inches cotton jacketed hose. So that was in the Harlem areas. And we had 2.5. And most of the top commanders did not like 1.5 hose. Or they don't like inch. The top commanders came up through factory fires, through warehouse fires, through loft building fires from downtown. So, see, residential fires hadn't really peaked in the 50s. We were still commanded by loft building fires and factory building fire commanders who loved 2.5. They shrieked at an 1.5 hose. They would get, and the reason was in those factory fires, you had big floor areas, and you needed 2.5-inch hose there with a big 50-foot stream. But in these small compartmented residential rooms, you could maneuver that little 1 3/4, 1.5 through. So it was frowned upon. And if something went wrong, at a residential fire, whether it was arson or whatever, you should have 2.5. So they didn't really like it. And there was only a few chiefs had a reputation of being inch and a half people like Artie Loff in the 16th Battalion. There was a guy in the 44th Battalion. The guys who came up the ranks in these busy residential areas understood the value of the inch and three-quarter. However, I have to say, as becoming a chief for 20 years, we overdo that inch and three-quarter hose. You say that guy's really. We had a church fire with 6 inch and three-quarter hose lines. That was not good. I mean, somebody should have said, "Hey guys, let's get a 2.5 inch hose." They wouldn't have changed the fire much. But sometimes we stop thinking. You got to be flexible. A great officer would say 2.5 guys. And we had great officers. Some guys you knew them. So that was it. So sometimes we don't want rote thinking, but when you have small compartmented areas, so we had 1.5 inch hose. They tried rubber hose without cotton jacketed, and it kinked too much. And then it went back to 1.5 inch cotton jacketed. And then a compromise was 1 inch and three-quarters. So it was like a 1/4 inch more. The old top commanders felt better. But when I came in the job, the standard hose stream, if you read some of these hydraulic books, was a 2.5 inch diameter, 1.1 inch nozzle, 250 gallons per minute, 1 ton of water. That's a standard hose line. Today, you might say the standard hose line is a 1 inch and three-quarters, 180 gallons per minute, 50 pounds nozzle pressure, and 3/4 of a ton of water. That's the real standard in a residential area. And then, of course, in the 70s, when the war years came, residential was our fire. The factory buildings, loft buildings were all sprinkled, and nobody had fires down there. So the fire service changed, and so did our hose diameter change.
And you talk in your book about thinking firefighters, and you want thinking firefighters. In particular, you talk about that with your 7/8 tip smoothbore. That then you ended up scamming a nozzle from a volunteer fire company and started using that, and with great success, right?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you about that. I mean, I see this today. Smoothbore fog nozzle. That's a red herring. That has no bearing. What are the arguments? Smoothbore fog nozzle. That's not the question. They have a constant flow combination, fog and solid stream. Don't they listen to the advertisement? You can put it in fog and put it in solid. So anyway, I'm a new captain up in the fire factory in 1968. So the trucks are getting tower ladders, the trucks are getting power saws, trucks are getting all this. And I got an 1860 controlling nozzle on. So I remember sending a report to headquarters. How about a combination FT2, and I'm not doing any advertisement, combination constant flow nozzle, constant flow. They said, no, I'm sorry, we don't have that. I knew the dangers of a fog nozzle because one time we had a fire and we had a 2.5 inch line with a Navy 2.5 inch fog nozzle combination, applicated fog nozzle, and we measured it. Got 90 gallons a minute. So that, you had a 2.5 inch hose with a Navy nozzle on it. Put it in fog, you got 90 gallons, and you got burned with it too. So we hated fog. But anyway, constant flow. I can think when to put fog on. And I used to have to carry a fog tip in my pocket. Of course, when we had these fires, we had cellar fires, oil burner fires a lot. So you're down there, the oil is burning. So you're hitting it with the solid stream and splashing it all over. So I said, I would like a constant flow combination, fog and solid stream. So headquarters didn't have them. So there was a guy, I think he buffed in the firehouse. He was an officer in the Nassau County Volunteer Fire Company. Oh, we got these nozzles. We loved them. I said, how about it? I think he came to me and said, you guys got these eye shields. How about if you buy me 30 of these eye shields down your fire station, give them to me, and I'll give you a FT2. He thought that was a fair shot. I said, fine. So I remember buying 30 eye shields. He wanted to look like a New York fireman out there. So I gave him the 30 shields. He gave me an FT2 nozzle. So the point was, we learned you had to start it with straight. We never went into a tenement fire on fog. So we would do the straight stream down, knock the fire down. And then if I had an oil burner fire, put it on fire. We put the oil burner fire out. And then, of course, we got a new technique that after we knocked the fire down in solid stream, I would go to a window. I would say, we'd be laying on the floor after knocking 2 rooms, 3 rooms, 5. I'd say, just stand there. And I would, in the smoke and steam, I would go over to a window. And I had this technique. If I slid one knee bent, most windowsills are 3 feet high. So I would hit the windowsill. And then I'd say to the guy, bring the nozzle over. He'd bring it over. He'd put it on wide pad and fog. And we could clear the room out. So, that was a nice thing. So, but anyway, I used to call it it's a thinking man's nozzle. You got to think, what do I want to do? But you can put out a fog. You can put out an oil fire. You don't have to run back and get fog nozzle. So that was my, and then of course, but what happened was there was some bad times in the fire department. We were going down union problems, and then we had a tough borough commander, and a couple of guys were burned legitimately, but he didn't like the number of burn injuries, so he just banned the fog nozzle. So we went back to the solid bore nozzle, but I like that. Every time when I go on Facebook and somebody posts, like 82 engine or 58 engine or 303 engine, a busy engine company with an FT2 nozzle, a fog tip, I always photograph and I say FT2 fog combination fog and nozzle. So we did use those nozzles, and I think we still have them, And it's a thinking, man. You gotta think before you open it up.
Doing hydraulic ventilation was a newer technique. How did you guys work with the truck companies? Because you point out in your book, you never got a medal for saving a life because you were in putting fires out. Those are the guys that generally on medal day, they're the ones recognized. So how did you guys interface with them?
Well, I had great truck officers. I was thankful. I worked with this guy, John O'Regan, who was probably the most famous truck officer in the FDNY. They don't know him now. But back then, he wrote Ladders 3, they called it, firefighting in, a lot of company firefighting in tenements. Tenements were the big building. Nobody could figure out how to fight. Very complex with shafts, had air shafts, dumbwaiter shafts, fire escapes on front and rear. And that's where most of the people were dying, not in the private dwellings. At this time, it was in tenements. And it was a very complex fire. And this guy, and actually the trucks in the 50s and 60s, some of them freelance. Some fire companies had great officers who had great standard operating procedures, but some didn't. Some had mediocre firefighting procedures. Some had no standard operating procedures. So trucks were a hotbed of freelancing. Everybody did freelancing. And you always like to carry an axe, not the bulky hook. They choose the 5 axes on a top floor fire. Everybody looked good. Nobody had a hook. But anyway, until this guy, John O'Regan, comes in, and John O'Regan, he gets an order from the chief of department. The chief of department knew him. And John O'Hagan knew John O'Regan. And O'Regan is fanatical about truck work in tenements. And he gave everybody in a ladder company, his procedure was you had to go to a certain location in that tenement. You had to perform a certain duty, and you had to have a certain tool there. Everything was specified, and then if you didn't, he would let you know. There was no nonsense. And actually now when we have a fatal fire, they come out with a big piece of paper and they want to know, they have the truck positions down and they want to get the name of the guy who was the outside vent firefighter. They want to get the name of the firefighter assigned to the roof operation. They want to get the name of the firefighter who had forcible entry. So O'Regan started all this stuff. So it was a systems approach. He had a systems approach for a ladder company to fight a fire in a tenement. And a big problem was, he tells me that for years, for almost a century then, the tillerman in the wooden ladders, the tillerman had the assignment of the roof. So O'Regan, knowing that sometimes at fires, you'd put a lower floor fire out and all the smoke would go up to the stairway and bank down to the top floor, and we'd find dead people in the stairway on the top floor in the hallway. So O'Regan was adamant about sending a firefighter to the roof, venting the skylight over the stairway and venting the roof doorway, so you wouldn't have these people dying in a tenement top floor. So his big problem was, he said, the tiller man, he takes time. He's got to help the chauffeur put that wooden ladder up. So now we have metal aerial ladders. But he said, I want the guy assigned to the roof from the side of the fire truck. I don't want that tiller man, because he can be delayed adjusting the position of the ladder with the chauffeur to get it for a rescue. And nobody gets the roof then. So O'Regan says, I fought everybody to change that, procedure, which we said, well, we always did it this way. The tillman always got it. So O'Regan said, no, we want to get a guy from the side of the rig to get up there and get that roof, because it's so important and it's got to be done quickly. That's all. But he was a tremendous zealot. He was a tremendous person, and he had a systems approach to how a truck company fights a fire in a tenement. And then after he writes that book, that bulletin, then it was a floodgate. Then we wrote a SOP for private dwellings, an SOP for road dwellings, an SOP for high-rise building, an SOP for every type of structure we have in there. But he started it. And, it was not easy to change 100 years of culture. Like the chief of department insisted. He said, John, I'm going to back you with this ladders bulletin, but this is... guys don't like this. You're taking away their creativity, So John said, no, I know this is right. So the chief said, you got to get everybody to sign off on this. I want the chief of personnel, because he was fighting all those political fights up in headquarters with the chief of personnel, the chief of training. They all thought they ran the job, not the. So the chief of department made O'Regan go to the chief of personnel, get him to sign off. Chief of training, get him to sign off. Had the chief R&T to have him sign off. But he had every chief. So when he came out and said, this is the new procedure, knowing they were going to get great flack, he said he didn't have to worry about his big staff chiefs coming against him, because he already had their signatures on it. So it's very tough. It's not only the fire service. This is bureaucracy. This is the bureaucratic system. I mean, bureaucracy is good, because we do the things, recurrent things. I love bureaucracy, but the point is, it's tough to change it sometimes.
But making it standard, you guys came up with a standard way.
That was a standard. Hey, listen, when we have standard on, the West Coast had standards too. They had a lot of high-rise guys out there, but the biggest, most popular standard was the private dwelling standard. When I would go out lecturing, everybody wanted to get a copy of the private dwelling SOP we had, and that was done by a Captain William Grimes. A guy broke me in a job, Bill Grimes. He did the private dwelling. So that was it. So it's a struggle, it's a struggle between the individual and the organization, right? We all know that. The individual wants to break through, but we need organization. That's the struggle of life. We have organizations. We know how important they are, but we all want to be free of the organization's political system.
Well, it seems to me that what you guys did was you wrote your SOPs around the critical factors that you encountered at different building types. So you didn't use a residential mentality at a tenement fire, let's say, or at a warehouse loft fire. That was a different set of tactics.
No, absolutely. You're correct.
So it wasn't the same. We're going to do the same exact thing over and over again, especially when it came to support work with ladder companies. And you said it, is they were freelancers. In our systems, the ladders could pretty much do whatever they wanted because the manual was so broad for ladders. And a lot of it was based on, just like you guys, the officer who was the leader of those crews is really kind of was going to tell, especially as a BC, you knew, okay, this ladder is good at this, and they all kind of have their own little specialties.
All right, that's a wrap of part one of our interview on B-Shifter. with Chief Vincent Dunn. We'd like to thank Vinny for hanging out with us. We have about another hour to go, so hopefully you can join us on our next Bee Shifter. That'll be out in about a week or so. If you are interested in any of Vinny's books, including his latest memoir about his war years with the FDNY, please go to our show notes. I have links to all of his social media as well as his website and where to get his book. So it's a wonderful book. If you are interested in the history of the fire service and the FDNY, it really is a must-have. If you have enjoyed this episode, I invite you to share it with your friends, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. Until next time, we really appreciate you listening. Please be safe.